Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So, good afternoon, Ingrid. How are you today?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks, Karen. Last one.
Lucky last, but I must admit it's been a great series. I reckon we're going to have to do another set. You don't get away that easily, Ingrid.
I think we'll have new ideas for next year. We can do some other snippets of things. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'll hand over to you to start today's session.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. All right. So today's webinar is about future trends in allergen management, innovations and insights, which was an interesting thing to pull together. I think what we could do today as well is just any questions that you have about anything that you've heard about allergy management that you want answered, just ask those questions today. Some of the future trends are quite clinical in nature in terms of what we do with patients and things, but I think I've managed to extrapolate some things across into the food service sector. So I'm just going to reiterate our key points because this will be ongoing, even though we think we might have some ways forward to manage food allergy. So people with food allergy have to avoid their allergen completely to avoid allergic reactions. Reactions can happen to really small amounts, a drop or a crumb of food, and reactions can be life-threatening. So what do we have out there in the ether for food allergy treatments? So again, this is on the clinical side. So you may have heard about oral immunotherapy as a potential cure for food allergy. So what is oral immunotherapy? So this is when someone has a food allergy, so they're reacting to food, and often it's anaphylaxis. Oral immunotherapy involves starting off with an extremely small dose of the food allergen and giving it to that person. So it's done under medical supervision. So if there is a reaction, it can be treated with the appropriate medication and supervision. And then over time, you gradually increase the amount of that food allergen to that person as tolerated. So people will tolerate different amounts of their food allergen. So when you're having oral immunotherapy, the goal is to be able to eat a food that you've been allergic to and not react to it. Now, different people will get to a different amount of the allergen that they can tolerate. So, for example, someone with peanut allergy, some people might get to 1 peanut where they react, some people might get to 4 or 5, some people might get to more. But the point about oral immunotherapy is that you have to eat the food daily in order to stay sort of not reacting to that food. There are some studies that have shown, that you can have longer term tolerance of the allergy, but that's really in the research setting at the moment. And it's only really just becoming a part of our normal sort of clinical practice with a specialist in Australia, and mainly in children because the immune system is much more malleable. There are other treatments that involve some medications along with oral immunotherapy, but really it's a long way off becoming sort of a standard treatment for everyone with food allergy, but we're getting there. And so it looks promising, but we're really, I think, years and years off this becoming an actual cure. And at the moment, if you have oral immunotherapy and you want to stay not reacting to your food allergen, you have to keep eating the food every single day. So it's like taking your medicine every day. It may be able to help with people not reacting to such small amounts of food. So if you've been someone who's really reactive to a really small amount, it may actually increase the sort of the dose of that allergen where you react. And so eating out and eating packaged food may become something that's a bit less scary for those people, but it depends on so many things. So people who are having this treatment, tend to have more reactions than people who are avoiding it, obviously because they're pushing themselves to try and tolerate this food. So anaphylaxis is much more common in people having oral immunotherapy simply because they're eating their allergen, and they're more likely to react with exercise, illness, if they have a virus or something, if they're having alcohol, if they've got their period, or with asthma and hay fever. It won't be effective for everyone. So not everyone who has a food allergy will respond to oral immunotherapy because different people's immune systems will react in different ways or respond in different ways to this type of treatment. So, maybe we'll get to 40 or 50% that might be able to have this treatment. And so there's still going to be a lot of food allergy in the future. So we don't really know at this point what the impact on the prevalence of food allergy will be. And I think the impact on food service will be fairly minimal because we'll still need all of our good processes in place for the people who this potential cure hasn't worked for, even years down the track. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, so that's oral immunotherapy. Karen, interrupt me if there's any questions that come up along the way because I'm not keeping an eye on the chat.
I will indeed.
Yeah. So with novel foods, so I don't know if you know what a novel food is, but basically a novel food is something that is assessed and regulated by by Food Standards Australia, New Zealand. And it's a food that is considered to not be a traditional food, or they're made using non-traditional processing techniques, so some kind of fermentation or some sort of novel processing or a novel food that isn't kind of common in our food supply. And FSANZ will assess them for safety. So some of the novel foods, lupin is a good example. So lupin is, it's a legume. It came on the market. It started to be grown more widely, particularly in Western Australia. In the 2010s, it became a mandatory allergen to be labelled in 2017 after there was a spate of allergic reactions to foods containing lupin. And so this is an example of a novel food, I guess, where you might have an allergen entering the system, or entering our food supply that people start reacting to. So remember, all foods contain potential allergens. You can be allergic to any food. And when we start introducing new foods into our food supply, we're probably going to see some new reactions coming out. So I think for lupin, it's important to be aware which foods have lupin. So it tends to be a lot of sort of baked foods and high protein type foods, some sort of bread bases and wraps and things like that. And you can find those in the allergy anaphylaxis allergen card. But that was just an example to sort of set the scene for when new foods become part of our food supply and become more popular. So insects is something that's starting to come into the market now, and this has been approved by FSANZ for sort of sale and use in food service in Australia. So insects are actually directly related to crustaceans. So they're part of the arthropod family. And people with crustacean allergy can also be allergic to insects. And so if you're doing anything kind of fancy or novel in your food service or your restaurant, just be aware that insects do have quite a strong cross-reactivity with people with crustacean allergy. Now, it's not something that is mandated. But I think this is where you need to be clear in your labelling on your menu, so that if someone with crustacean allergy comes into your restaurant and they order a particular meal, if it contains insect protein, it's probably good to mention that somewhere in the label of that menu item, so that they know that that's something that they could potentially react to. It's not the job of food service to check really that if a person cross-reacts to both, the clinical specialist is responsible for letting people with food allergies know what novel foods may be a problem for them. But I think it's good in food service to be aware that people can react to any food. So crocodile can react with some fish and mollusk and crustacean allergies as well. So people with fish allergies may not necessarily know that they are going to react to crocodiles. They may not understand the cross reactions. So it's just good to be aware of. And then there's lots of exotics that come into the market sometimes. So there's various nuts from other countries that are starting to come in to the Australian food supply. Native foods as well, so things like wattle seeds and different native plants that we're starting to use more in our cooking and food service may be something that people react to. Some genetically modified foods could be a potential risk, and then lab-grown foods as well. So lab-grown foods are seen as sort of the future of a good sort of protein source option for the future. And we really haven't assessed these for different allergens and whatnot. So this is something that will have to be assessed before it's allowed to be on the market in terms of cross-reactivity to various other allergens. There's also an example of things that are already on the market, algae and mealworm. And then there is quite a movement now within the food science sector to try and develop foods that are less allergenic. So less allergenic forms of milk and less allergenic forms of egg, where you've actually taken the most common allergenic culprit or particular protein compound out of that particular food to try and make it less allergenic. Now, again, the problem with that is that it's not going to work for everyone. So if you have a hypoallergenic milk, that may not work for everyone with milk allergy. Same thing with egg. If you have a hypoallergenic egg, it may not work for everyone with egg allergy, because it really depends on which particular protein in that food that person reacts to. So it'll be on a real individual basis. And so I think for food service, new foods or new allergens just mean we really go back to what we already know, and that is that any food can cause an allergic reaction, and your staff need to be trained and they need to know that. So even though we might see new foods coming into the market and new allergens, we might see some people reacting to these new foods, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to become an allergy that is one on the mandatory list that has to be declared on a food label. But we know that within food service, if someone walks in with any allergy, so an allergy to capsicum or tomato, you still need to know what is in your food so that you can advise them whether that particular food will be safe for them. So it's kind of, even though all of these new foods are going to come into our space, basically knowing what's in your food is the most important thing. And so we need to be able to read food labels both for the mandated allergens that have to be declared and for any ingredient at all, so you know whether you're able to provide a safe version of that meal for someone who walks into your food service with any kind of allergy. And then, of course, your good risk management. And as I said before, it's health professionals and our consumer education bodies that are the ones that need to help people who have particular food allergies understand what new foods that come into the market and that might be served at restaurants or might be in packaged food are a risk for their particular allergy. And a good example here is that insect protein and the crustacean allergy. So that is really the response of the sort of in the clinical space. Now, the other new things that are coming up. So FSANZ is starting to look at the review of Chapter 3 of the Code. Now, you may or may not remember that Chapter 3 of the Code is where all the food safety comes in. But there is a bit of confusion between the different chapters of the Code. So the FSANZ Chapter 1 of the Code talks about all the mandatory warnings. So we've got that list of allergens that has to be shown on a packaged food and that you have to tell customers about if they ask you in food service. So if someone says, does this, I have a milk allergy, does this meal have milk in it? And you have to tell them. So that's Chapter 1. And then Chapter 3 is a little bit confusing because it says that just because a food has an allergy in it, it doesn't make the food unsafe. So it's not unsafe for everyone. right? Because I don't have any food allergies, and so a food with milk in it is not unsafe for me. But my friend has milk allergy, and so that food is unsafe for her. So food is unsafe if it causes physical harm to someone who might eat it. So if you serve my friend a meal that is that you say has no milk in it and she eats that, but it does have milk in it and she reacts, then that food was unsafe for her because she ate it thinking that it didn't have milk in it, but it did. So it's confusing and it's really hard to explain. And so FSANZ has recognised that this needs to be clearer for food service, so that consumers and food service can do a better job of communicating about food allergies in that food service space. And so these kind of definitions of what is a hazard, what is unsafe, is likely to be strengthened in the next. FSANZ processes can take a while to be in place because it has to go out for a big consultation kind of process. But it's likely to sort of strengthen those requirements for food businesses to do food allergen management training and have food allergies specifically included in their food safety programs. So that's the kind of watch this space thing. And I think that will be strengthened, and we can communicate that through, ACF when that kind of thing happens, and even, invitations for being part of that consultation process can come through ACF as well. So the other thing that's probably, I guess, is a bit of an innovation in the food allergen space is this consensus statement that was released in 2020. And so this was a collaborative effort between the researchers, so the Centre for Food and Allergy Research, which is like a research centre of excellence that's also now affiliated with the National Allergy Centre of Excellence, which sort of researches all allergies. The National Allergy Council, Allergy and Anaphylaxis Australia, the Allergen Bureau, ASCIA, which is the health professional body, Allergy New Zealand, and the Food Allergen Management Symposium, which is kind of an arm of the Allergen Bureau, as well as researchers and individuals and health professionals and other consumers in the space. We also had sort of big players in there like Woolworths and Coles and the Australian Food and Grocery Council in there, who were part of these discussions about having this consensus statement that outlines the responsibilities of all of the different sectors of the food industry. And so one of those sectors is the consumers. So the consumers need to declare their allergies and read food labels and make informed decisions about the foods they choose to consume. So that's their responsibility. They need to tell you about their food allergy. And then to help consumers make informed decisions and stay safe. There's a section there for food manufacturers about having good allergen management practices, doing proper risk assessments, and using clear, consistent labelling that helps consumers make informed choices. And if you think about it, packaged food manufacturers also help food service make informed decisions about the ingredients that they include in their meals when they're making foods for people with food allergy. And so I think that's a really important kind of crossover there with consumers and food service. And so with food service, it's their responsibility to ensure that staff understand, that they're trained, that they can tell consumers about the allergen content of the food that you're serving, and that you have good allergen management practices. So this is a consensus statement that was released in 2020, and because there's been some changes to how food manufacturers are labelling foods, which I'll talk about in a minute, this is currently being revised, and where it's just going to mean that there's going to be strengthened statements for all the different sectors. We've also added 2 sectors we felt were missing. So we felt that we hadn't actually outlined what the responsibilities of health professionals is. when they're seeing, they're diagnosing people with allergies, and then they're providing them with support to help them make these informed decisions. So there's a real education piece that health professionals need to do with their consumers. And then there's also responsibilities of the regulators and the authorised officers in terms of supporting food manufacturers and food service businesses around their legal responsibilities for food, providing food to people with allergies. So we've included those two in the new statement. It's not finalised yet, so I'm not putting the finalised one up here, but we're also hoping, have included more industry bodies rather than just health professionals and researchers and the consumer bodies, which is whose logos you can see there. We're now including industry bodies, so Australian Food and Grocery Council, the Australian Institute for Food Science and Technology, Australian Culinary Federation, and hopefully some other food service bodies as well. So it'll be a more well-rounded statement. And so this really just helps us to kind of back up all the things that we're doing to try and support food manufacturers, food service and consumers in this area. So the other thing that we're going to do kind of alongside that best practice paper is to actually develop some guidelines for food service. So this is kind of a set of principles that will sort of underpin everything else that we're doing to try and support food service and authorised officers to help consumers with food allergy eat out safely. And so this will be done in collaboration with the food service industry, the consumer bodies, Allergen Bureau, RTOs who are doing the training. As I said, we'll aim to support everything else that's going on in food service in this space. And hopefully this will be out in 2025. We're sort of just starting this process now, but there's already work underway in the quick service restaurant sector. And there's a bunch of quick service restaurant organisations, so some of the really big players, who are actually drafting a best practice guideline that'll be out soon for consultation around food allergen management, specifically for quick service restaurants. So we want to develop one that has similar messages, but that is a bit more broad for food service sectors, because there's so many different kinds of food services. There's restaurants, cafes, hospitals, childcare, camps, caterers, all sorts of things. So this will sort of build on that work that's already been done there. So the other thing that you're likely to hear a bit more about is the VITAL program. So I'll get into what that stands for now. And I did mention it, I think, in webinar 2. About the sort of labelling and around precautionary labelling, but this may be used to sort of underpin some of the sort of systematic work that you need in food service to make sure that you have a robust allergen management process. So VITAL was designed or developed by the Allergen Bureau, which is the peak industry body for food service, and that's all of their members there. So the overall objective of VITAL, so VITAL stands for Voluntary Incidental Trace Allergen Labelling, and it basically means when you're doing a warning statement, so may contain or may be present, there's no legislation for this, so it's a voluntary program. And so what the food industry has tried to do is to get a more scientific, kind of robust way of doing this, so that when you actually have a warning statement on a packet, it means something. It's not just kind of put on there without any thought or any risk assessment. So the objective is to try and make food as safe as possible for most consumers with food allergy by making sure that food labels are consistent. So actually looking at the quantity of food allergen that might be present in a product. So, as I said, it's a quantitative scientific allergen risk assessment. So what you do is they look from the paddock to the package and look at the final package and all the things that happens before it gets into the final packet, and whether there's any actual like risk of cross-contact from an allergen, and how much might actually end up in that packet and how much the consumer might eat and whether that's likely to result in an allergic reaction in someone who has an allergy to that food. So it's still a voluntary thing, but it is it's kind of leading the way globally in terms of how the food industry across the globe is starting to label warning, use the warning statements on packets. So there's a lot of countries that are adopting this system to try and make allergen warnings actually mean something to the consumer. So why was it developed? It was developed to provide a consistent method to assess whether there's an allergen in there and tell the consumer about whether an allergen is in there, and to also respond to the lack of regulation that's there. And then where there is legislation, so some countries do legislate precautionary allergen labelling or warning statements, it can support those environments with an actual system that people can use. And the precautionary statement is maybe present and then whatever the allergen is. So there's only one statement that's recommended to be used. So what do you do with Vital? So what a food manufacturer will do is they'll look at which, what the mandatory list of allergens are, whether those particular allergens are going to enter the food production system. You identify which ones are intentionally added, so which ones are an ingredient, and then you look at which ones might come into cross contact. And so you do that right from where you've got your source ingredients. So sometimes this might be, like where's the flour come from? Where did the lentils come from? And is there any cross contact back in agriculture? And so then there's actually a calculation tool that they can use so that you can actually identify how much of an allergen is left in the product. And this process has used clinical studies across the globe that look at the most sensitive allergic individual and what the lowest amount of allergen is in the dose of food that they'll react to. And if it's above that level, then it gets a warning statement. And if it's below that level, it doesn't get a warning statement because the likelihood of someone reacting is so small that it's not really, you don't actually need to have a statement on there. And then part of that is ongoing monitoring. And so one of the questions that the Allergen Bureau is starting to ask is, can we develop a similar process that's probably not as complicated? So obviously you need something that's much more simple and that you can react to, in sort of real time in food service. But, there's things that you can do that sort of underpin your food allergen management system. So, your people and your training, your recipe development, deciding what ingredients you're going to use. Analysis and testing is probably not as relevant for food service as food manufacturing, but also like where is your food coming from? Is there any cross-contact risk while it's being delivered to you? What about your storage? How do you produce things? The space that you have in your kitchen, how can you organise that to minimise cross-contact? So there's sort of a systems approach that's being applied, and that best practice guideline that I talked about that the quick service restaurants or fast food restaurants are looking at is looking at a similar kind of process, but to actually make it applicable to the food service setting rather than a big manufacturing plant. So this is sort of where we talk about our systems approach, which I touched on in one of the other webinars, where really your systems approach has to look at, you start off with a policy and procedure and a food safety culture around food allergy. Look at your training, who's trained, is everyone trained, front of house, back of staff, who is on site that is trained and that can help with food allergy queries. Is your communication flow happening between customer, front of house, back of house, all of those communication points that we touched on before. Is there allergen information that staff can refer to give that correct information to the customer? And is that a manual process, or do you have software that can help? And then all of your processes around ordering, receiving, storing, cleaning, preparing and serving food. So the other sort of area that we haven't really talked about in any of these webinars yet is online ordering and meal delivery. So this is, another can of worms really for food service, I think, with allergen management. So you will all know that Australians like to order food, and have it brought into their home. So they're either ordering directly from your restaurant and having it brought by you, by your staff to home or wherever they're eating. Or they might be ordering online through you, directly with you, and you might be using a third party to deliver, or you might be using a third party to order, like an online platform that sends you their order, and then it might be delivered either by your staff or by a third party staff. So there's all these other people coming into the process with consumers with food allergy. So it's very popular. And I guess, there's some specific things that apply in this space around food allergy management. So when you're looking at your website, is the information on your website about the content of your meals, is it accurate? So is someone with a food allergy able to tell from your website which meals might be appropriate for them? Is your menu up to date on the website? Are you making any claims? You're saying something gluten-free or dairy-free, or shellfish-free? Because if you are, then that might discourage someone from actively contacting you and telling you about their allergen if they think, oh, it doesn't have peanuts, fine, I'll just order that. Whereas you might actually want to know so that you can take more measures in the kitchen and meal preparation to make sure that there's no cross contact. So how do your customers tell you about their food allergy? Do you have some way of them telling you that they have a food allergy when they order? And then if they do, so if they say, yeah, I've got a milk allergy, or I've got a peanut allergy, and they type that in, does that information actually get to the person receiving the order? And does it then get to the person who's making the meal? And so there's all these communication steps that have to happen in that online space as well. So it's something to really think about. And there have been incidences where the information hasn't flown through. And someone's reacted to a meal that's been delivered to them that actually contained their allergen. And so some restaurants will ask people to actively call them if they have a food allergy, rather than place their food order online, so that they can make sure that they're doing all of those sort of, allergen management practices. So with a third-party app, it's a similar thing. And so check whether the accuracy of the information about your menu is correct. Is it up to date? How do the customers put into that app whether they have food allergy? Do you have the food allergy, field actually turned on in how the app is connected to however you're receiving the orders? Because with some apps, you can turn the allergy section on and off. And how does the information get to the person who's making the meal? So does that allergy information flow from the app to your end, where you're actually receiving that food order or that docket, or however it spits out at your end? And then with delivery, so this can also be a little bit fraught with danger, I suppose. So when you're delivering something to someone, because you're not actually, keeping that meal and going, yep, this is the one for the person with milk allergy, and then delivering it straight to that person, like we talked about in the last couple of webinars. But you're packaging it up and you're sending it out with another staff member or a third party. So with delivery, you really want to clearly label which meal is for the person with allergy. Label the meal with the name of the meal so that they can remember which meal they actually ordered, and then label what the allergy is that it's for. So you might say no peanuts, or you might say this is for the person with peanut allergy. Or if you've got the name of the person with the allergy, you might put their name on it. So just have some way of clearly labeling which of those meals has been prepared for the person with food allergy, so that they know that whoever's prepared it has had their allergy in mind. And then package the meals up so that they can't get contaminated from other meals, any food allergens. So Some meals are more prone to leaking or spilling. So just try and make sure that it's got an extra wrapping, or it's in a really good sealed container, or it's in a separate bag. So you might have a separate bag or container that says this is for the one with the allergy. So if you've got your own staff, you can train them about meal delivery and how you want those meals delivered. You can ask them to, so when you give them the meal, it might be for a group, you might say, this is the meal for someone with allergy, please keep it separate. And then when they actually get to the customers, they can hand over and say, this one is the meal for the person with the allergy. So then there's more, there's sort of clearer communication. If you're using a third party, you obviously have less control. And so I think your packing and your labelling is even more important. So make sure it's clear, make sure it's separate, so that it can't do any, have any, cross-contamination. You could also advise the customer and say, look, this is what we do. We package it, we label it, but we actually don't have any control what happens once we give it to that third party. And so then that consumer can decide whether they want to accept the risk of any cross-contamination. And, you can be as nice as you can. You can ask them to keep it separate, and you can ask them to tell the customer which one is the allergy meal. But if you've got it clearly labelled, that's probably the best way of getting that communication to happen. So the other thing to be aware of is that Victoria, I think I mentioned this before, but Victoria have a mandatory anaphylaxis reporting system. And so any anaphylaxis that happens, and most anaphylaxis will present to an emergency hospital, that must be reported to the health department. If the anaphylaxis is because of food, those incidences get investigated, because they're trying to get more information about why that reaction has happened to food. And also this can result in food recalls of packaged foods, that may not have the allergen declared. So this is just what's been reported over the last few years. So if we look at 2023, so there was nearly 1,600 incidences of anaphylaxis to food. And the blue section there is the food that is unpackaged from food premises, so about 550. Yeah, that's just in Victoria. So that is restaurants, cafes, and potentially fast food restaurants as well. There's a whole lot there that we don't know. Got like food other, so that's it's a whole sort of bucket that they haven't quite categorised yet. But some of the root causes are things like people not declaring, but also just people being given their food as an ingredient. But I think this is good to know about, because it's possible that this reporting system could become nationwide. Not tomorrow, but in a few years. But we do want more allergy reporting across the nation, so that we can help with education and support to reduce the risk to people with allergies. But it's just interesting to note, I think, that there is a significant number of anaphylaxis to food, and that doesn't represent the ones who had allergic reactions that weren't anaphylaxis. So there's more allergic reactions happening. Not just anaphylaxis.
So, Ingrid, we've got a question. Is this part of what we're going through now? Is this part of the packaging regulation for food at present?
What do you mean, the vital bit, or?
Greg, I'm not sure. Sorry, it's just I'm just going through the question there. Greg's just typing in.
I'm not sure if my mic's working. Can you hear me?
Yes, it is. Yes, you can.
Good, thank you. I'm just thinking of the workplace I'm at the moment. Occasionally we'll get, call it the doggy bag. So that's covered under a separate set of regs. So this packaging is now starting to look like anti-tamper.
Yes. Yeah.
Our response to that in terms of packaging it for the takeaway, would that really depend on the risk profile of the ingredients that we used, or the trace elements of ingredients that we used? It has to go through the risk assessment before decision
Yeah.
comes. What I'm talking about is common sense, given the context.
Yeah.
But, you know, is it mandated at the moment, or is it working towards it?
No, it's not mandated, but I think so, you know, in terms of just providing safe food, you know, the consumer still needs to declare that they have a food allergy, and then the food business needs to decide whether they can safely provide that meal in that delivered space, right? If you know that things are going to leak on the way and there's going to be a lot of cross-contamination, I think you need to let the consumer know, because you can still do all the labelling, but if you think there's going to be leakage of that food in the delivery process, then letting the consumer know, and then they decide whether they still want to have that food delivered or not. I don't think it needs to be anti-tamper. I think it needs to be, as you said, like common sense, but just taking precautions to keep things separate if you know that there's a likelihood that something could be, you know, come into contact with an allergen from another meal. And remember, it's the ingredient level that causes most anaphylaxis. But if you've got like a big leakage of something and that gets into someone's food with food allergy, that is eating it at the ingredient level.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
It's not so much the cautionary allergen statements, you know, on a package. You can still tell them that that's in the meal as an ingredient, and they might go, yeah, that's fine. But the actual, you know, cross contact from leakage is kind of a different level. If you know what I mean, it's a much higher level of contamination.
Yeah, the risk assessment too from an OHS methodology needs to be done.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a different bag of worms looking at from a manufacturing perspective to say a pub.
Oh, definitely, because the food service, like if you think about it, you know, a takeaway place or even just a busy restaurant, you know, you're making so many quick decisions, you know, every few minutes about what orders you're getting in. It is a completely different space. But I think like the principles of a systems approach can apply, but it just needs to be a lot more, a lot more simple, like a big manufacturing process. It tends to be the same process every time you make a food, whereas in a food service, it's different. And so I think that's why food service needs so much support to help get this right.
We try and emulate the machine as close as possible.
Yeah, exactly. But we're humans. There's a few quirky things. So, you know, you've probably heard about or seen some of these test kits or allergen swabs that you can get for specific allergens. And so big manufacturing plants will use these to verify their cleaning processes, but you still need all of those risk management processes in place before you get to, you know, to swabbing anything. You probably don't need them in a busy food service kind of setting, because you need time to do them. You need someone who's trained to do them, and we really don't know how good the application is. And sometimes you might test something and it's not there, and you might test something the next time and it is there because of the way, you know, because of the nature of food and how food is prepared. So just having really good cleaning processes and cleaning often and well in between making food for people with food allergy is still the most important thing, rather than trying to, you know, get too much fancy equipment in and being reliant on that. And then the other thing, which was my lighthearted thing, was allergy detection dogs. So these are like service dogs that seems to be more of a US thing, but they have actually trained dogs to be able to smell the presence of an allergen. So you might see some allergy service dogs entering your restaurants, but I'm not sure how well it's going to take off, because in terms of, you know, actually, you know, smelling a really small amount doesn't seem to be part of what they're actually able to do. But thought that was a funny little thing that I could add in there. So in terms of resources and what you might see coming down the track, this is really just a reminder of resources. But with our online training, which I put up before, and our resources, so we're evaluating these ongoing, and we'll be doing an in-depth evaluation to really look at the format of it, how it's delivered, and whether it suits sort of our food service workforce, which tends to be young, high turnover, and a lot of English as a second language. So we're really looking for participants in focus groups and things like that to actually look at our training and whether it's delivering what it needs to that particular sector. I mean, it's a good package, but I think it could be made better for that, those to make sure that we're covering all of our workforce in food service. Allergy and Anaphylaxis Australia support both consumers and food service if you've got any queries or questions. So they're always good. They have a helpline that you can access. And they also have like a chef card that that anyone can download and use. So you may get, some customers presenting what they call a chef card, which basically lists the allergies that they have and just says, can you please just take care with, using clean chopping boards and knives and mixing bowls and things like that. So that's something that, food service staff or your front of house staff can take back to the kitchen and it could get returned with their meal. So it's another way of flagging, this is the one for the person with those allergies. So it's just another communication tool. And then again, FSANZ, so constantly updating their food recalls, and any legislation that comes through, and this is the place to look for any sort of consultation that they might be looking for on improving or any changes to the Food Standards Code. That's where to access the Food Standards Code. There's usually updates every couple of years to various sections as problems and issues arise. And then your regulatory agencies as well may, have some changes to allergen management that they want to communicate to the food industry as well. And just a reminder that New South Wales Food Authority has lots of good free allergen information on there. And the RTO, the package for the food safety supervisor training, has also been sent to all of the other jurisdictions. And so you may see that coming through more in, as RTOs are encouraged to include that information in their food safety supervisor training. So I'm out of time. I'm going to be quiet now. But thank you so much for attending the series of webinars. I hope they've been useful. And let's have any other questions. Taking my hold.
Everyone's very quiet today. Oh, we've got one saying this has been a very amazing series, very thorough and professionally presented, great relevant information to food service. And just while we're on that, I'd like to also just for a second, just remind everybody if my page is sharing that everything's up on the ACF website. So if you come onto our front page, we'll bring you straight into the Allergen Management, straight into all our webinars. And on each one, we've got all the resources, etc. in there. So after today, the fourth one will be in there as well. And from my side, I'd like to say thank you very much to Ingrid. Ingrid is the one who has all the knowledge on this. I've learned so much in the last 4 weeks. So from our side as well, we really appreciate it. And we look forward to further collaborations with you and obviously support for any initiatives coming up.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks so much, everyone.
Great. Thank you. And everybody said thank you so much. There's some lovely feedback coming in there.
Yeah, that's great. And anything, if you have any questions or need any further support or any ideas about other resources or anything that we can develop, please just get in touch because, we're constantly looking to, provide more support and resources, whatever's needed.
We'll pass anything out as well if we need surveys or you need any feedback, we'll pop it straight out to you too.
Great. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. And we're gone 6 minutes over, but that's quite good. There's been lots of valuable information. Thank you for everyone for attending. And also at the moment, we're in the middle of our sustainability webinar. So if anyone wants to jump onto those next week too. So thank you. Take care and have a good afternoon.